Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
In politics. In politics, in Canberra in 1933. They had a pretty rough spin in Canberra, the coal miners. Canberra, the township, with about 2,000 of a population. And there were two small mines organised with non-union labour, worked with non-union labour. My husband formed the first union in Canberra, and that would be about 1933. And of course that brought a lot of reaction from the townspeople. Now all the townspeople in Canberra were agreed that the miners had terrible conditions and terrible wages, but they didn't fancy having a strike about them. Well, after the Miners Union the Canberra bench had been formed, the men went for an increase, and in those days they didn't even have showers at the mine. And the miner worked on Saturday night until midnight and always come home jet black with all this coal dust. They didn't have facilities of any sort at all.
No showers.
No showers at all, nothing. The men went to work and come home with all the dirt. And there was no Saturday afternoon, no extra payment for working on a Saturday, and they'd work to midnight. I think this is quite correct.
Yeah, no agreement.
No agreements. Anyhow, once the union was formed in the Sunbeam Colliery, things began to move quite a bit.
Now that was where Watty was, the Sunbeam.
Watty was the secretary. In those days, he was the president of the Sunbeam Colliery. Then when they got their first award, the mine was owned by J.J. Liston, and they refused to pay the award though it had been granted by the judges, was it?
Yeah, there hadn't been a wages board established. And our fight was to establish a wages board where we could go and get an award. That was established, that wages board.
Well, then they locked the miners out, and of course there was no relief in those days. The unemployment, when they paid it, the unemployment relief was 11 shillings a week for a husband, a wife, and a child, because we drew for months while we were locked out. The conditions really were bad. And in those days I was quite a good churchwoman. I was a Sunday school teacher. Presbyterian to begin with, until I had a disagreement by the narrowness of the outlook of the Presbyterian people, and I had a first class row with a Presbyterian minister who was frightfully snobbish and thought my husband had no right being interested in politics. Well, that went down very badly with me, and then again I got tired in attending church guild to hear women describe the unemployed as worthless, thriftless, shiftless people. Now I knew better, and all the time there was a growing discontent with me about them accepting such lousy conditions and being prepared always to blame the miners. And then they started to attack people like my husband. Well, I knew of the outstanding work that he was doing for not only the miners but for the working class and the unemployed in Wonthaggi and Canberra, because he formed into a union the unemployed there, and they were getting paid 10 shillings a week in those days, and my husband managed to force it up to £2 a week. And of course he was not popular with the powers that be. He wasn't popular with the farmers, who saw a source of the cheap labour disappearing. In the meantime the fight went on. Now in 1934, during the big strike there, the Communist Party and the Miners Union thought it would be very much more interesting if they brought women into the movement. And then they formed the first Miners Women's Auxilliary in the history of Australia. Wonthaggi was the parent auxiliary. Now when the women were first started in the auxiliary, they were there more to help where there was real hardship in certain families, or where there was women having babies, to help out in these things. But then the working class always threw up its leaders, and they found out that wasn't just the sole answer, attending to this sort of aspect. So they became interested in quite a broad way. And in the strikes that, I'm better go back close to Canberra. Well, that was the Women's Auxiliary, which was the parent auxiliary in Australia, was formed in 1934. And in 1935, an auxiliary was formed in Canberra, which I was the first secretary. They did a very good job, and one of the things that was helpful was that the women took the place alongside the men, which was quite unheard of in a conservative township like Caranbara. Well, then we worked on and we did some very good things, and we maintained a close contact with Wonthaggi. But there was no comparison in Caranbara with Wonthaggi. Caranbara had 2 small mines, and it was a township where it was a centre of a dairying industry, and the men worked in railways and factories. In Wonthaggi, it was a coal mining town where the voice of the miners made decisions and moved and did all sorts of things. Well, in 1939, early 1939, we came to Wonthaggi. And the women, by this time, the mines in Caranbara had been completely closed down. It wasn't a case of leaving a town and leaving the mine upside down. The mine had been closed down and weren't to be reopened. So we came to Wonthaggi.
Was that because of the militancy of the workers or because of the poverty of the seams and the mine? It wasn't a very good mine, was
It
it?
wasn't a good mine. They objected to paying the miners what they got. They said it wasn't profitable to run, and they closed down the Sunbeam Colliery. There was another one called the Austral.
Yeah, they tried to break the union by importing scabs. They couldn't do that. So what they decided to do was shut the whole thing down and wait, and then reopen it, which they did.
I see.
Yes, there was some bitter fights took place in Caranbara. They didn't try to employ scabs, and the men had quite a fight on their hands. And then certain ones were picked out. And I remember coming home from a meeting one night with my husband with their 2 or 3-year-old boy in our back, and they had been armed, some of these scabs. And a shot just whizzed past their young son's head and was being carried on my husband's shoulders. Then they started to intimidate us round the house. But we were fighters, and the iron had aced and we were prepared to fight. Well, they spoke to the scabs, they broke up the scabs, the mine kept opening and shutting. Sometimes it was a strike in Caranbara, sometimes it was a lockout. But all the time, the men, I've never known a more loyal, and this includes Wonthaggi, I've never known a more loyal set of men and women than there was employed in these coal mines. The women folk were splendid. They organised social evenings. They organised monies to help people that were in hardships. And they really did a very good job. But finally the mines...
Tell them about the time the women went and turned these things.
Oh, well, I'm not so terribly familiar with that, but I know that the Women's Auxilliary in Caranbara, there was still one scab that they couldn't get out. So some of the more militant women, and I'm afraid I was in those days, decided to teach him a lesson. So they went along, quite a group of them, and got this man to tar him and feather him. But they also decided that they would stop the mine producing this cat coal, so they cut the electricity. And how they did it, I'll never know. But anyhow, the policemen also came down to lock the women up. And my husband came down then, the secretary of the union, and told the women not to tell the policemen anything, and so on and so forth. But they knew that there was such a sort of sulphurous attitude in Caranbara that had they jailed the women folk, the miners would have torn the jail down.
How many miners were there?
There was approximately 80.
100 odd.
Oh, they did not 100, was it? Oh, it wasn't that small.
No, it was a very big mess.
In comparison to Wonthaggi, it was small.
Yes.
But they were really very good people. They really were very good.
Any of them still come to Wonthaggi after?
Oh, quite a number came from Caranbara to Wonthaggi and played the role here as very good militant unionists. Then we came to Wonthaggi early in 1939, and of course I naturally was interested in the Wonthaggi Women's Auxilliary. And again, this auxiliary had developed such a lot from it was formed in 1934. The main objective wasn't just the welfare of people, among mining people, but they branched out in a political way. when the Foreign Broad Committee meetings and had propaganda committee meetings, the women took part in the propaganda. And in the strikes, we went to Melbourne and we had raised hundreds of meetings, putting up the story of conditions in Wonthaggi, what the men were fighting for, and what they hoped to achieve, and quite a lot of good work. There was a social committee, and there was quite a number of committees, all within the Miners Women's Auxilliary.
This has been during the war, after the war, before the war? What time?
This was in 1959. During the war, well, we were mainly engaged quite a lot in patriotic activities, you know. It was a war against fascism, and for a war such as that, we were quite prepared to work and do what we could. Now, then we got concerned about the fact that in any township, Wonthaggi had a much larger population in those days. I think by that time it would be about 8,000 or 9,000.
There were 760 women in the mine at that time.
1760.
No, yes, 1 in the mine at that time. Anyhow, you'll get in all townships, there was 1 or 2 retarded children, but they weren't being properly cared for. So the Miners Women's Auxilliary started to agitate around these things, and we were instrumental in getting a retarded children's centre. Then we were instrumental in getting a kindergarten. And when Lady Herring opened it, she paid tribute to the work done by the Miners Women's Auxilliary in both the retarded children's theatre and in the kindergarten. And then one of our greatest needs during the war was a maternity wing. We had no maternity wing, and 1 or 2 of the private maternity homes were closing down. It became quite a problem. There was quite a number of young married people here. So then we decided we must have a maternity wing. But it was during the war years, and we were told we couldn't possibly spend all that money. Well, I wouldn't like to tell you the amount of work that we intended to get in that wing, but we eventually got it. And in recognition of the work done by the Miners Women's Auxilliary, it was named after the foundation president, the Agnes Chambers Maternity Wing.
Joan's foster sister, right?
Yes, and Joan Chambers and her
Mother,
Yes.
And what sort of work did you do for it, Agnes? Raising money or deputations or both?
Both. Raising money and getting other committees. It wasn't just the Miners Women's Auxilliary. There was quite a number of other committees were organised into this fight. Then we had to raise money on this government level. We did supply so much and made the supply so much. But there was a complete recognition of the initial work done by the Miners Women's Auxilliary. And in fact, it's one of the most modern maternity wings in Victoria, the Wonthaggi one. And as I say, they just pay tribute to the work of the Miners Women's Auxilliary. Then, again, the Wonthaggi women as women didn't need it, who did their shopping locally. But farmers' wives come into the township and they'd no place to rest. So then we organised for a rest centre. We got that also, and again, the Wonthaggi Auxilliary was paid tribute to for the work it had done. So altogether, from its small beginnings, it's just an organisation to look after the women who were sick or had want in their family or any such thing. They really become quite a strong political force.
How many members would you have had?
Well, at one period there was about 60 or 70, but right up until the mines closed, it would average 35 to 40. And they were all women, and this may sound a bit prejudiced, but the majority were women of outstanding views. Very good, prominent people who were cultured, who had quite a good background of knowledge, and who were interested in how the country was being run, apart from how things were being run in Wonthaggi. And I think it's only fair to say that the success, that there have been quite a number of successes in the strikes entered into by the miners, the successful conclusions owe quite a bit to the Wonthaggi Miners Women's Auxilliary.
So my also that was Billy Hampton, wasn't it? So, and quite outstanding the way the women here stuck in the strike.
Well, that's quite true. Well, then again, they felt the men were being paid fortnightly wages. which didn't fulfil the needs in the coal town, and we felt we needed weekly wages. So the Miners Union had been fighting for this for some time. So Judge Gallagher came to Wonthaggi for this hearing about and I was asked to put the case for the miners' women, the Miners Women's Auxilliary, when we were asking for weekly pays. Well, that was quite a successful court meeting. We held up in the court, and we did succeed in getting the weekly wages before we got them in New South Wales. Well, then our work took us, there was different strikes, and our work took me around the coalfields of Australia. I was able to address quite a large meeting in Glen Davis. That was a shale mine before it closed down. Well, as I say, all our women become interested in different things. I tended more. I joined the Communist Party in 1939. The early experiences in Caranbara had shown me that despite what was said in newspapers and despite what was the opinion engendered among the people, that the communists that I came in contact with struck me, and I've had a church background, but I was struck by their humanism, their knowledge of what the people really needed, of the work that was done by them. And then when we came to Wonthaggi, I was also amazed at the way that I think they called themselves the Young Communist League and then the Eureka Youth League. In strike times, they came up every Sunday bringing truckloads of food. They contributed in such a lot of ways.
Well, it's interesting because I was in the Eureka League and it never seemed to me that anything we did very much at all. But a lot of people have mentioned it. Harry Bryden mentioned it. Didn't seem to me that we did really.
Now, I think you've got a wrong opinion if you look at it in the theatre.
No, it never seemed to me that we did enough, very much at all compared to what we could have done. You know?
I remember Sunday after Sunday, the Eureka League coming up with truckloads of meat and all the rest of it. I also mentioned that one of the other things that the auxiliary was very good at doing was for augmenting meetings. Now, the ABS, the Australasian Book Society, was helped considerably by the Miners Women's Auxiliary and by the Miners Union. We met the young writers and would-be writers. We encouraged them financially and in every way and bought their books. We formed ourselves into an ABS society. We always also encouraged the young people who were setting off with dancing careers, ballet and what have you. We encouraged the folk singers, whatever we could encourage in any way and help. Then we did become rather partisan in strikes. If the seamen had a strike or if the wharfies had a strike, we would send down £10, £20, we'd run social evenings for them. And that's one thing an enlightened working class woman does. She does become partisan to workers elsewhere fighting for their, for decent and better conditions. Well, I don't know that I can tell you much more.
Were you married to Agnes, doctors up?
Oh yes, we fight round 3 days and then the doctors up. And really and truly one could go on for...
Tell us about this. What was the 3 minutes in fight?
Well, then during the strike, the children, they were frightened they would suffer from malnutrition because some of the strikes were quite long, quite extended. So then we formed a milk fund. And I was the secretary of the milk fund. Mrs. Chambers was the president of that. Now, we raised money and we got help and we purchased milk. And every day during the strike at every school, we would get great cooperation from the nuns in the Catholic school and from the school teachers. Every child was issued with half a pint or a pint, if he could contain it, a pint of milk every day. We also, through working, making contacts in Melbourne, we all supplied them with an orange and an apple a day. And then we had doctors come up in connection with the medical scheme, and to make sure the children didn't suffer like so many of their parents had suffered in the past from malnutrition. We had the scheme worked out where they got cod liver oil and tablets with cod liver oil and other tonics. And really and truly, with what it did to the men after working 8 hours underground and all the anxiety of that, that the miners would take on a new lease of life when they got out into the sunshine. And the miners' wives were quite an enlightened body of women, and they were quite happy that their children were being catered for and there was no malnutrition.
What strike was that you got the milk and the oranges?
I think that would be in about 1944, was it, Wattie, or 45?
Was there a big strike then too?
Yeah, there was the first round along, the second round along, and all these were strikes. There were strikes and all of those. The thing was that people used to laugh in those days when you talked about holidays with pay. They laughed if you're talking about pensions. That'll never happen. Long service leave. So the aim was the first and second round along, and it was the miners, and it was the miners led by Nelson and all that really put into the pockets there, not just the miners, the Australian working class, millions of pounds of dollars have been there because it was the result of the sacrifices and the strikes that were took place at that time by the miners. And the first round along had limited objectives. I'd have to check, but these were involved in it, holidays with pay, and the thing that Agnes went to see Gallagher about, weekly pays, and all these sort of things were all in the first, and what wasn't secured in the first round was secured in the second round, and it put into the pockets of the Australian workers millions of pounds. They thought, but it established a pattern. And honestly, even the miners used to laugh about pensions, and even when we got pensions here at 60, the lot didn't want to go off, and I think we did make a mistake in this much, that they went off at 60, but they didn't have the medical allowances that the social services had, with the result that it wasn't easy living on the pension, the miners' pension, and that's one thing we hadn't bargained for, you see. But we were extra poor, and I think that looking back on it, I think that some mistakes, I think we could have had a better deal, but at least we secured the principle. And that's, at 60.
The miners retired at 60.
Yes.
When did that come in?
Well, that was in the second round of the log. That would be 1940, I think.
I see, as early as that. You were doing it.
Yeah, well, I think I think the first round started in 37. I think that the final roll-up with all these claims came when we had an advantageous position because the war was on.
Yeah, you started sort of going on to the offensive in 37 with your...
Well, you see, Wonthaggi was the catalyst.
Yeah.
That sparked it.
You were on the offensive in 1934.
Well, Wonthaggi was the catalyst. They sparked it. And the whole of the strategy and strike tactics employed by the communist-led unions, because, you see, the Miners Union branched out and secured connections with other unions. Well, you know that the ironworkers were, and the other unions, the seamen, and the communist builders and them led, that they all started going. You see, but it started from Wonthaggi, and Wonthaggi was the only town where that strike could have been successful at that time.
Yeah.
Because all the elements were there for securing success. There was the conditions, there was a pin-pricking management that turned the last screw, but also being forged was a leadership.
Yeah.
And that was the all-important thing. But then again, it was the first time that this new dimension of politics had came from Wonthaggi. Prior to that, there had been ALT, syndicalists, all the hammer with the holding the OBU. But this was something of a different calibre altogether, because here was Marxist theory and tactics being applied, and it was applied very skillfully and cleverly, and they picked the right place in Australia for to do it.
Yeah, go on.
And that started the whole thing rolling. Well, the first and second round of logs, they achieved, there was only one thing they hadn't achieved, and that was 35 hour week, which they achieved a few years ago. Well, everything all the targets that were set had been achieved.
Was the militant minority movement ever successful in any other industry that was in?
Well, I don't think it could have been so successful, because the conditions say, here's what happened. You had two theatres on Wonthaggi. You had the soldiers' theatre, as they call it, where a ton of soldiers invested a few bob and they were on the picture. Then you had the Union Theatre. Well, what happened was this. The minority movement, they said they had 300 members, with distributed 40,000 right leaders. Well then, the thing was that they met in the soldiers' theatre, made the decisions for the union, and then walked up to the union theatre and went on the union meeting. They already said who could stop them. And this was one of the big complaints of the constitutionalists, of the moderates, as I said, why should unions be wrong like this? Why should outsiders interfere like this? And why should outsiders make decisions? And this was one of the big bones of contention, you see. But then the minority movement recognised this, so they came along and they said, all right. They said, all unions are affiliating with the minority. What about the Miners Union affiliating with the minority movement? Then there was no outside interference, you see, because then the first sprag was the sprag. That the minority issued by the minority movement. Then it became the miners' voice, but then they made it the union voice. It was all this was all symptomatic of the growing political development of the movement here, and their understanding that they had to, even often in the bulletins, they admitted they made errors and mistakes. For instance, when they put forward the candidates, they contested in 34, they contested every position. When minority movement, they said, we're wrong, we haven't got a monopoly of good people. Let some other people have a go. We'll just contest key positions, you see. So they were learning. You can see, reading the sprags, how they were growing in political consciousness and understanding it. And they admitted the mistakes, they admitted it, but they said, we're new, we're young. We make mistakes, we offend people, but it's only because one gets somewhere in a hurry, they said, and something's got to be done. But the thing was that I don't think there'd be anywhere else, to my knowledge, where the conditions were such that it was possible for this thing to take place.
Yes, sir.
But it was all important for the Australian working class because it put them back on their feet, because they'd lost their morale, there was no fight in them, and it put them back, the whole, not only the miners, but it put the whole industrial movement of Australia back on its feet again.
Where did they sell the regulators? In the street or on the job or where?
Well, the Billera brought them here, I know that, but what they had runners. And eventually, we, in Wonthaggi here, we sold 42 dozen workers' voices. 42 dozen, dozens and dozens of all the periodicals, World Peace, all the things at the time, and well, I was in charge of it. I wasn't in charge of it, but I knew it was taking place. I was
They were sort of, you had something, but they didn't
We had runners.
like they were around.
No, well, there's no place again in Australia that had been so well marked out by the streets, and everybody had the responsibility for an area, and that's how it was just.
Everybody was from door to door.
Well, they had the regular customers, but also then they would try and get other customers and canvass. At times they would have start going out canvassing on a Sunday morning or something like that.
Yeah, I wondered if you sold them mostly on the job or mostly door to door, but
Then we took them out to the mines.
yeah, that's what I know.
Taken out to the mines and distributed today. But it's a question of that the people were organised that they had their area and they worked in an area.
Mick Haley something.
Tarambura, I was secretary of the union. I used to take the stump on a Friday, you know. They'd pay the dues, the union dues.
What's the stump?
That was the union dues.
The payment of dues.
Oh, that's the stump.
Yeah, I was I was secretary.
Yeah.
And what I used to do, I would read the headlines, and at cross shifts, I would read out the headlines. And
Workers'
yeah, I'd tell them.
Yeah.
And then I'd have a pile of workers' voices beside me when I was taking the stuff. And of course, then I would, you want a worker's voice when they paid the union dues. Listen, this is what I'm cutting, but a big
Well, the union dues were? How much were they at?
Well, let me see. Well, in Wonthaggi, and when the 12.5 was on, they were paying £3 and £4 a week. £3 and £4 a pay. That was in the strike was on.
Yeah.
That was.
Yeah, that was with the,
Yeah, but at that time, but no, they were about, I suppose the union dues were about well, they were £10 at me.
a week, that's all they paid.
Pay that was fortnight at me.
Well, I don't thought anyone, did people object to the 12.5% or was it, well, you didn't have a choice anyway, it was.
No, nobody objected.
Yeah.
No, nobody objected. There's only one occasional Wonthaggi when anybody raised objections to union dues, and we had a chap here, and we had a stock meeting, and he was an import, he was a strikebreaker, and they'd imported him. I just forget, it was just shortly after the war. I don't know how. This chap went to a solicitor and sent a letter, a solicitor's letter to the union claiming a day's wages from the union because he had lost a day's wages because that, well, we had one of these pit-top meetings I told you about where the sea was booming behind us and the fish were coming then. So we said, all right, we're going off. Well, this chap, following this meeting, sent a letter to the union claiming a day's wages for loss of work. So what we did, we had a committee meeting, and the party had a meeting first, I guess, and we had a committee meeting. So I was on the pit committee at West, and that's where this took place. So I never said anything. I just waited till all the men were together. So I got up, skipped. So I said, well, look, I said, before you go down this morning, I said, there's something I got to report to you. I said, we've got someone working here. I said, who sent a letter. I said, a solicitor's letter. I said, claiming a day's wages for loss of work because the action that we took, it'd been about a fortnight before, I think it was. Now, I said, I'm not going to say too much about this. I said, this is the first time, I said, probably in the history of the mine that we've had such a position. Now, I said, what do you think we should do about this? And of course it was all put up.